We're talking about extradition on the phone in today. 5 terror suspects could soon be on their way to the United States after European human rights judges said they could be extradited to face trial over there. Still with me is Di Davis, former Chief Superintendent of the Metropolitan Police, who's a security consultant. Also, Pete Weatherby QC is a human rights barrister. Pete, part of this, I mean, one of our callers just said this is all so hideously complicated.
Yeah.
It's very difficult to have a kind of blanket view on it.
Yes,
Is it inevitable that this is going to get caught up in endless court action and decisions over who gets tried where?
Well, to some extent, yes, and to some extent, no. Sorry to give you a lawyer's reply.
It is a lawyer's reply, yes.
Yeah, but we're all in favour of doing things much faster, and we're all on the same page in terms of increasing the speed which the Court of Human Rights works. But there have to be greater resources put into doing that. But the fundamental issues here are of fairness. And if we have the rule of law in this country, and if we criticise others for not having the rule of law, then we've really got to abide by it. Now, as a human rights lawyer, I'm all in favour of extradition. It's an absolutely fundamental issue. The protection of victims and the prevention of crime and all the rest of it is fundamental to human rights. But you can only do that properly. And there are issues in terms of where you extradite people to. And although America is often viewed as a friend of the UK, it has a very, very poor recent record on the treatment of so-called terrorist suspects. And frankly, sometimes...
Why would these judges have said it's fine to send them if they weren't satisfied that they would be treated fairly?
Well, because the Court of Human Rights is doing its best on the evidence before it to consider whether the very high test under Article 3 of the Convention, the prohibition on torture and inhuman and degrading treatment, is made out. And they decided in a number of domestic law cases that it wasn't the imposition of a lifelong sentence which was the problem, and it might be that further down the line that it would contravene the prohibition on inhuman and degrading treatment. And I suspect, not having had time to pore over this judgment yet, that that's really the decision they went down. But the area of consideration by the Court of Human Rights is very, very narrow. There are some pretty fundamental difficulties with extradition in this country, and they are recognised by many in Parliament. In fact, it was only a couple of days ago, on the 30th of March, that the House of Commons Home Affairs Committee recommended, for example, forum provisions, which in plain English means that where you have a crime committed in this country, you shouldn't extradite to another jurisdiction because you should try the case here. And they also want to go back to the pre-2003 system, whereby foreign states...
This is before the extradition treaty in 2003.
Yeah,
right.
They want to go back to the old extradition treaty, in fact, where the requesting state, in this case the US, has to provide a prima facie case.
Do you want to explain that for those of us who aren't lawyers?
Yeah, well, it just means that they have to provide enough evidence to persuade a court in this country that they have a case to answer.
And they don't do that at the moment?
They don't have to do that at the moment. And so, take it away from the US at the moment. There are proposed extraditions to states, even within Europe, which have, frankly, very inferior criminal justice systems, which are taking place as we speak on the basis of extremely flimsy cases or worse.
I just had a text which I want to put to you, Pete, because it's about a comment you made earlier when you were saying that these guys, if they're convicted in the States, could end up with life without the possibility of parole, which you said was unfair because there's no chance for them to, serve 50 years and then change their minds about their views. Would they still be dangerous? Sean in the Ronza has just texted to say, these men are not going to change their views. What planet are you on?
Well, I'm on the planet Earth. The fact
so it's a view a lot of people will have about, radicals of not necessarily Islamists, but any radicals. Terrorists don't often change their minds if they are terrorists.
I'm not sure about that. I mean, you go across the world. Nelson Mandela was famously called a terrorist by Margaret Thatcher. There are countless heads of state who were called terrorists in colonial wars. Now, I hold no candle for Islamic extremists whatsoever. If they do wrong, if they commit serious offences, charge them and jail them in this country or in the country where they committed their offences. I've no problem whatsoever with that. That's part of the rule of law.
Di Davis is still with us. I could hear you guffawing when I mentioned Sean's text, Di.
Well, no, listen, Peter, the QC, makes a very eloquent case, as always. What I would say is we've got to look at the evidence provided. There are different rules of evidence provided in English courts as against the US courts. I think we fundamentally need to look at the evidence that we actually give before courts in this country before we start preaching at others. There are lots of things we can't put before a court, secret evidence from the security service and others, phone tapping and all the rest of it. So these are fundamental issues, and I don't know enough about these cases except to say the biggest human right is the right of life. These men, all of them, allegedly have played a part in trying to take life away from others. And the problem with international terrorism, finding the jurisdiction which is the right one to actually deal with them, is a problem.
This is going to become more of a problem, though, isn't it? This isn't going to go away, this problem, as you say, international jurisdiction. Who do you try where?
Well, we've had a learned judge, as Lord Carlisle told us, who's looked at it. The government, in fairness to them, have actually asked for another look at this whole subject, and I'm open to suggestion. But I say again, what we've got to look is how we present evidence against alleged suspects, and I'm all for fair trials, otherwise it does destroy the rule of law. So I have some sympathy, but my overall perspective, as somebody who's lifted up body parts and put them into bags in the 60s, 70s when we had huge bombs in this country, yeah. I have my sympathy is for the great mass of us who don't have the eloquence of QCs or even retired chief superintendents to articulate their views. And the vast majority, I think, would say, look, we trust the Americans by and large as much as we trust anyone. I don't have huge trust in this country's legal systems. I was in Holloway Prison with a client last week. I wouldn't want to be there. I think that's pretty inhuman, but that's where we put people, often without charge.
Try to improve that, and I at risk of agreement breaking out, there's much of what you say that I would go along with and agree with. But the fact is, since 2003, we have dumbed down our extradition processes. Yes, of course, we should have phone taps in evidence. All the civil liberties and human rights groups in this country and beyond agree with you on that. It's actually the security services that disagree about that.
Okay, I'll just stop you there, Pete, because I've got Richard on the line from Harlech. Hello, Richard.
Hello there, how are you?
Afternoon. I'm good, thank you. What do you make of this ruling today about the extradition?
Well, at the end of the day, I think that, it's a good thing that we have extradition in process, because ultimately we are in a state of limbo with people like Abu Hamzah. He's not British, he's not, we're not going to send it back to his home country, and so, we have to do something about somebody like that. The only thing I will say is that extradition has to be balanced, and I just wonder why we don't have extradition by jury in this country.
By jury?
Yeah, by jury, instead of having judges actually pass the judgment.
But that would be like holding an entire case if you had to present it in front of a jury. You might as well try them here.
Well, at the end of the day, there is that about it, but. When you think about it, there is too much secrecy involved in extradition, and yes, you can say, well, yeah, protect sources, protect the people who are trying to defend this country, absolutely. But when there are so many ways of displaying evidence these days, there is no real reason for us not to have a proper extradition case go forward and have it done by jury, because at the end of the day there is way too much secrecy, and at the end of the day these people, they do need to be dealt with, and I just think that we need to do it in a balanced way, so we're not seen A, to be puppets of any other government, and B, that things are done fair.
Do you think we're seen as a puppet?
I think we are, because I would argue, and I'm Christian, so I hold no real candle to the Islamic belief system at all. But we still have Irish-American websites from NORAID, or the Northern Aid Committee, online today, spouting the same rubbish they spouted about the British in Northern Ireland, and yet not one Irish American has ever been extradited to Britain for fundraising of terrorist activities in Northern Ireland, or one senior Irish American ever apologised to the people of the Republic and Great Britain and Northern Ireland. And so why is it that we are not dealing with them as well?
OK, thank you, Richard. I've had loads of emails on this. Sheila in Caerleon says, hello, Mai. Of course they should be extradited to the USA. Why should we try them here with all the cost that would entail? We've kept them long enough in better conditions than a lot of our own. Nasser in Cardiff says, I think Babar Ahmad should be tried here as he's a British citizen. We're talking about human rights. These are what we are all entitled to living in this country. He will not get the rights he's entitled to if he's sent over to America. He would get a fair trial here, which is what he will most definitely get when whether found guilty or innocent. From what I know, he's trying to clear his name and should be given the chance to, with our fair justice system that we all rely on. And an anonymous text says, just sent all 5 terrorists to the USA today. They're criminals, monsters who will get justice in the USA. UK justice is too soft to everyone, especially for terrorists. Di Davis, part of the problem with this argument, of course, is that it's such an emotive issue. As that last text says, they're all monsters, they're all terrorists. These guys haven't been convicted yet. But, you just stick terrorism in the charge and people instantly think, OK, hardest punishment no matter what.
Well, I concur with that, and I try and take the emotion out of my feelings, having seen so many terrorist incidents firsthand. And you've got to be balanced. You're quite right. What I do say is I don't think judges, if you've ever stood before a judge in the Old Bailey, as I have numerous times, they are not pussycats. And appeal court judges aren't either. I don't buy that we are the puppets of the United States. Yes, there are some anomalies, and yes, they ought to be straightened out. And I hope the latest inquiry into this will sort it out. There are some anomalies, but I think by and large it's as good a system as it can be at the moment, given, as I've said, the different rules of evidence, which is crucial when you're trying to convict a terrorist or anyone else, either in America or in the UK. But we do have to keep up the fight, and I think this sends a powerful message to those who use international terrorism and go around the world purporting violence against citizens who have no defence. Then it is right that they suffer the consequence.
Pete, final comment from you. These 5 can technically go to the Grand Chamber of the European Court to try and appeal. Highly unlikely they'll succeed, though, isn't it? And Theresa May, the Home Secretary, and David Cameron have already said they want to ship them out as fast as possible. Yeah,
I think they probably will try and go to the Grand Chamber. Whether they'll succeed or not, I don't know. That's
it's quite rare, though, isn't it?
I'd be in Ladbrokes if I could answer that question rather than anything else.
Yeah.
But here, we're talking about the rule of law here. What was the problem with a system that we had where the US would have had to provide a prima facie case against these men so that we don't have to take it on trust? Your caller a moment ago said, why all the secrecy? Why not go back to that? It worked perfectly well before, and it's all above board, and we can all see it. If we don't have a system like that, we could argue the other way from Di and say that the people who are attacking the rule of law, the so-called terrorists, they're winning, aren't they? If we abandon the rule of law and we just go with the mob and try and deal with them just by extraditing them without proper evidence and sending them off to countries where they haven't committed those offences rather than trying them in countries where they might have committed those offences.
Thank you. We're going to have to leave it there. That's Pete Weatherby QC, who's a human rights barrister. Thank you for joining us. And we also just heard from Di Davis, who's a security consultant, former chief superintendent of the Metropolitan Police. Keep